Since the dawn of man, music has been an intrinsic factor in our evolution. From the Paleolithic era up until now, humans have relied on music to not only bring us entertainment and joy, but also as a means of catharsis. Whether it be a honky-donk melody played on a bamboo kalimba in the heart of Zimbabwe, or a maddening blast beat strewn out on a polyphonic synthesizer on the stages of Creamfields, the sheer array of musical genres and styles that exist today is truly mind-blowing and difficult to conceive of. However, it should be said that buried deep beneath the obvious pop, rock and rap that dominate the airwaves lie a much more sinister and disturbing form of music. Hi, I'm Modus, and today I'm going to be walking you through the disturbing music Iceberg and explaining some of the stories of the most unsettling music to ever have been released. Viewer discretion is advised. And because it's so long, I'll be separating the several different sections into different tiers with separate videos for each one. And just in case you don't know how this works, as we travel down the iceberg and explore its various tiers, the music itself will get more and more disturbing. So let's get into this, with the first album, surprisingly, not only being one that I've heard before, but also a personal favourite of mine. It's Kid A by Radiohead. Radiohead are a British rock band hailing from Abingdon in Oxfordshire and were formed in 1987. It's comprised of 5 members: Tom York, the singer and rhythm guitarist, Colin Greenwood on bass, Ed O'Brien on guitar, Phil Selway on drums, and Johnny Greenwood on guitar. Radiohead have taken many detours with their music and have implemented various styles and genres within their sound. Unlike most bands who often find success with the release of their first album, Radiohead's progression from a school band to the stadium fillers they would ultimately become was slower, nuanced, and more thought out. Their musical catalogue twists and turns, merging different genres and challenging musical norms. Their earlier works, such as Pablo Honey and The Bends, with their heavy emphasis on guitars and feelings of alienation, although at odds with the prevailing music at the time, was a far cry from their synth-laden experimental webs that they would spin on their most recent release, A Moon-Shaped Pool. Although, with that being said, their unconventional masterpiece, Kid A, easily takes the cake when it comes to disparate and sonic landscapes and themes of war and environmental collapse. The artwork, painted and manipulated by Stanley Donwood, was influenced by a photo taken during the aftermath of the Kosovo War, which he described as a square metre of snow full of the detritus of war, such as military equipment and cigarettes. He said, "I was upset by it in a way that war had never upset me before. It felt like it was happening in my street." The spine of the album was also designed by Donwood, and was influenced by the 1988 graphic novel brought to light by Alan Moore. During the novel, the number of people killed by state terrorism is measured by swimming pools full of blood. The music itself follows a similar, haughty desolation, and although the tracks fit together well and sound like they're coming from the same place sonically, I'd consider it a stretch to call the album conceptual. The opening track, Everything in Its Right Place, is a perfect example of this desolation that I talk of, with the angular chopped-up vocals levitating on a sea of squishy, melancholic synth pads. It almost sounds as if the soul of the song has given up on trying to reach any type of resolution and has become comfortable in its forlorn ambiguity. The track Tree Fingers is a purely instrumental affair and falls midway through the album, but unlike other mid-album tracks, this one doesn't stand to signify any major change in pace for the following songs. It's a moody and brooding affair with elements of sci-fi set in a barren desert at the crack of dawn. Lappings of icy synth sounds crash against the droning orchestral wall, lulling you into a sense of self-assured desperation. It's a confusing track and contradictory with its motive, but at the same time hauntingly beautiful, and serves the rest of the album well. As a whole, I'd describe the album as sad and longing, with fits of miasma intertwined throughout. I feel the song motion picture soundtrack, with its slow pace, double bass swells, and alternating harp strums, melded together into what I can only describe as an overly emotional paste that sticks to every part of you, pulling you to the ground, exemplifies these qualities better than any other. And that's not to mention Tom York's defeated vocals, which sit fragile, almost broken, right in the middle of the mix, as he exclaims, "I think you're crazy maybe, I think you're crazy maybe, I will see you in the next life." This song may just be the most beautiful depiction of suicide I've ever heard. Well, if there could ever be such a thing. Before we move on to the next album, I'd just like to say that I know I probably spent too much time on this particular band. I'm sorry about that, but like I said earlier, they are one of my favourite bands, so it was sort of expected that I'd end up writing too much. But don't worry, I've looked at the rest of the Iceberg and I can't say that I recognise any of the other bands on there. So the future contribution should be much shorter. So, moving on to the next album. Porcupine Tree are a British rock band hailing from England and was created by singer-songwriter Steven Wilson and was initially a solo project. However, by 1993, he decided to include other musicians in the project. The band's lineup has changed frequently over the years, with Richard Barberi on keyboards, Colin Edwin on bass, and Chris Maitland on drums being the only frequent collaborators. Over the years, Porcupine Tree have employed many different styles and genres into their sound, ranging from psychedelic rock in their early years through to a more mainstream sounding mid-career, all the way to the sinister atmosphere of In Absentia. In Absentia, although not a conceptual album, seems to me to be an interpretation of Steve Wilson's then obsession with the lives and vicious tendencies of serial killers. Steven Wilson describes the lyrics as being about people on the fringes, on the edges of society. He stated his interest is in not what they did, but in the psychology of why, and what caused them to become unhinged and twisted. He described the name of the album, In Absentia, as being sort of a metaphor. There's something missing, a black hole, a cancer in the soul. It's in absence in the soul. The album opener, Black Eyes, starts strong with an aggressive angular riff that jumps out of the speakers at you like a muffled pit bull. The riff returns throughout the song, increasing in abrasiveness with each pass, interspersed between the distortion and moments of what sound like pop bliss. However, on a closer listen, you soon realise the dark lyrics that underline the track. Steve Wilson sings about all the nefarious secrets that a killer has had in his head and what lies under his bed and in his garden shed. The song becomes more and more creepy with each listen, and the non-offensive sounding choruses lull you into a false sense of security before spitting you right back out into the fire. For me, the most disturbing thing about this album is the duality that it possesses. It has this unwelcome ability to place you in two completely different spaces in rapid succession. The changes in theme, tone and style are just as unnerving as the lyrical content and muster the same feelings of sinister creepiness. Pink Floyd are a British rock band from the English metropolis that is London. They were founded in 1965 by Syd Barrett, who recruited Nick Mason, Roger Waters and Richard Wright to complete the project. However, after Barrett suffered a series of mental breakdowns that could or could have not been the result of a drug-induced psychosis, the band decided it would be best to replace him with David Gilmour, who would go on to be the band's singer and lead guitarist from then on. They have been heralded as being one of the first British psychedelic rock bands and were distinguished by their elaborative live shows, sonic experiments, and philosophical lyrics. As of now, they've released 16 studio albums, with their most popular projects being conceptual. Of these conceptual attempts, it was their 1979 rock opera, The Wall, that instills a sense of isolation in the listener. The album follows the journey of Pink, a fictional character based on the former frontman Syd Barrett's descent into depression. The album starts with Pink, a rock star, addressing a group of fans at one of his concerts, just as he's about to give them an unexpected performance. He suddenly has a flashback on his life up until that point. During the flashback, he envisions his father being killed in World War II, leaving only his mother to raise him. He begins to build a metaphorical wall around himself, which is reflected in the first track of the album, Another Brick on the Wall, Part 1. Suffering the torment at school by tyrannical and authoritarian teachers, Pink's teenage years are filled with despair and longing. Memories of these traumas combine to create bricks in the wall. As the story continues, Pink remembers more about his troubled upbringing, such as his mother, who was overprotective, and the Blitz that ripped through his hometown. He collects these memories in preparation to complete his wall. He would also seek casual sex to relieve the drabness of touring and to quell the fact that his wife had also been cheating on him. Dejected, Pink fantasizes about his wife and makes plans to harm her, and feeling trapped, he ignores his past troubles and the impact they have had on him. Pink's creation is now finished. Surrounded by a towering wall of his worst memories, he's completely isolated from the outside world. But questioning his decisions, locks himself in a hotel room and turns to his possessions for comfort. After having flashbacks of World War II, of people demanding that the soldiers should return home, he yearns to reconnect with his hometown and the people that embodied it. Regaining partial consciousness, Pink wakes up to his manager and roadies breaking into his hotel room where he lays unresponsive. Paramedics attempt to save him by injecting him with drugs in hope that he will be able to perform at a concert later that day. Soon after the drugs kick in, he begins to hallucinate a past performance of his where he is convinced that he is the autocratic dictator and that his concert is a smokescreen for a far-right rally. The concert would prove to be fatal for a minority of people in attendance who were deemed by the fascist mob to differ too far from the norm. As Pink wakes up from his hallucination, tormented with guilt, He begs for everyone to stop their torment before placing himself on trial before his inner judge, who orders him to tear down the wall as punishment for his behaviour. The album then ends with the closing words, "Isn't this where we come in?" The phrase that began the album, which in combination with the repetition of a melody from a previous song suggests a cyclical theme to the album and expounds the existential crisis that the troubled rock star Pink will never be able to escape. Spasmodic is a song by Skinny Puppy, an electro-industrial band from Vancouver, Canada. The song is featured on the album Too Dark to Park, which was released in 1990. Over the years, they have had multiple members, with only Kevin Key and Nivek Auger remaining constant figures. They released most of their music between the years 1984 and 1992, which employed a range of genres from the time, such as industrial, electro, and EBM. And although most of their albums followed suit with this combination of harsh industrial percussion and distorted vocals, it wasn't until their 1990 album, Too Dark to Park, where they would perfect their sound and create something truly disturbing. Spasmodic is a haunting song full of disease, decay, and torment. From the first line, the listener is transported to what seems to me to be the grimy lodgings of a drug addict on their last legs. The lyrics portray a decrepit and malnourished character experiencing severe physical and emotional pain. Images of crushing crucifixion and particles aching are screamed in a low, distorted voice over a darkly chaotic industrial beat, creating a claustrophobic atmosphere that you just want to escape from. As the song continues, the now despairing character begins to hallucinate from their drug use and become increasingly delusional. They speak of the faded spirit of the gold-toothed whore and moon dances, wondering how this could ever be, emphasizing their disconnection from the real world. The final verse sees them partially awaken from their drug-induced delirium, with imagery of a horse and conjured cards, which suggests a gambling addiction. The lines, "the phantom pinches," and "half-eaten candy," paint a story of a deranged sense of reality that remains even when the substances wear off. And holy hatred kicking the habit, a plea to themselves to get clean, only not being able to, due to the pain withdrawal will bring. Nine Inch Nails is an American industrial project from Cleveland, USA. It was founded by Trent Reznor, who was the only permanent member of the band until Atticus Ross joined in 2016. Reznor, although producing most of the music on his own, is known to assemble musicians to perform live with him under the name 9 Inch Nails. As of now, the project has released 11 studio albums as well as 10 promotional singles and has created music for various films such as The Social Network and The Girl with the Dragon Tattoo. With his one-man band approach to making music, Reznor creates and produces most of the band's material on his own, resulting in an instantly recognisable sound. Their 1994 album, The Downward Spiral, is a classic example of this originality, only with a darker, more perturbed underbelly. From the ashes of addiction and feelings of alienation, The Downward Spiral was conceived in the infamous Tate House, the previous residence of disgraced movie director Roman Polanski, whose wife, Sharon Tate, was brutally murdered by the Manson family. The album is conceptual and, like Pink Floyd's The Wall, follows the story of a misanthropic man's descent into darkness. The album employs multiple layers of metaphor throughout its playtime, with many of them relating to nihilism and self-destruction. Concepts such as solipsism paint an isolated picture of a person detached from society and spiralling through altered feelings of religion, violence, disease, and culture before ultimately ending their life. Over the years, and despite its cult-like status, The Downward Spiral has come under fire as being the catalyst for various crimes, with the most infamous being the 1999 Columbine High School Massacre, where two 12th grade students would go on to take lives of 12 of their fellow students and one teacher. Sunno is a drone metal band hailing from Seattle, Washington. They were formed in 1988 by Stephen O'Malley and Greg Anderson. They have collaborated with a slew of artists over the years, which would prove to be a defining characteristic of their sound. From doom metal, drone metal, all the way to dark ambient, Sunno have implemented many different genres into their music, with only the droney aesthetic of shoegaze remaining constant throughout their albums. They have released 9 studio albums to date, with Monoliths and Dimensions holding the crown of their heaviest work. Brooding with illusory guitar drones feeding back through deeply distorted amplifiers, Monoliths and Dimensions, although lacking a coherent theme throughout its playtime, cements its airy presence throughout a cavalcade of sonic detritus and gruff vocals, and only really lets you take a breath with the spacious elegance of its last track, Alice, which plods along a loose blues scale before being softly swept up by a hazy arrangement of horns, violins, and harps. This album is dark and demonic, but surprisingly, not to the point where a second and maybe even third listen will be completely unimaginable. In fact, I think it will be likely for the unaccustomed first-time listener to want to dip their feet in even further to this black hole. And that ultimately is what makes this album so disturbing. It's the unrelenting feeling it plants in the listener to return even when they know it could be their last time. Sonic Youth are a noise rock band from New York City, USA. They were founded by core members Kim Gordon, Thurston Moore and Lee Ronaldo in 1981. Emerging from the no-wave art rock music scene, Sonic Youth have been praised for redefining what rock guitar can do and influencing the alternative and indie rock movements that would become popular in the following decade. Using a combination of alternate tunings and techniques, they were able to craft what would become known as their blank-eyed, drug-addled debut, Confusion is Sex. Sprouting from the filthy streets of New York's thriving art scene, Confusion is Sex throws out slivers of ringing and reeling six-string debris before sinking into a pool of its own sordid dissonance. Stories of loneliness and vulnerability give a turbid feeling of tension to the album, along with a moody atmosphere that is reminiscent of bands like Joy Division and early Pink Floyd. It doesn't share any commonalities with the classic heavy metal or horror punk, which was popular at the time. It's a much more dissonant and scattered affair, with the lyrics like, "She cried for help under heavy anesthesia," and "Careful with that axe, Eugene," which suggests a much more austere and foreboding picture than the upfront brutality that its contemporaries were painting. Tool is an alternative metal band from Los Angeles, USA. They were formed in 1990 by James Keegan, Adam Jones, Danny Carey and Paul Diamore. He was replaced by Justin Chancellor in 1995. To date, they've released 5 studio albums, with all of them sharing a similar heavy metal, progressive rock sound. Their debut album, Undertow, is often cited as the metal album that helped the genre remain prominent against the rising popularity of grunge and set a new dimension to the limits of what was possible within the genre. With its focus on experimentation, Undertow presents a much more dynamically diverse set of songs that are less heavy than the band's previous works. The sound is mercurial and dark, a lake of quicksand waiting for its next victim to fall foul of its frenetic energy before being flung back through the syrup for the whole process to start again. The album artwork features the liner notes of a nude obese woman, a naked thin man, and the band members with needles in the sides of their heads, generated massive amounts of controversy, which resulted in the album being removed from major stores. Toby Mac is an American Christian hip-hop artist from Virginia, USA. He's been active since 1989 and has a slew of albums under his belt. His distinctive ability to successfully merge Christianity with various other genres has seen his music reach critical acclaim. The skill is most evident on his 8th studio release, The Elements, where he takes a darker, more introspective turn and explores the challenges and struggles we all face in life, while drawing parallels to the forces of nature. Thematically, The Elements are a metaphor for the bad weather in a person's life, the suffering and difficult circumstances. The lyrics touch upon the struggles and obstacles that humanity faces in a pursuit of autonomy and fight for what people believe in. The idea of overcoming personal fears in the face of adversity and growing up in a ruptured society keeps this album marching forward through the thick and thin and sets its place as an introspective totem in our minds. Death Grips is an experimental hip-hop group from Sacramento, California. Members Zach Hill, Andy Morin, and Stephen Barnett formed the group in 2010. The sound of the group, although harsh and angular, is also anxious and jittery, almost like they're trying to combine the heights of an overpowering panic attack with the grizzly from a grizzly bear. On none of their albums is this combination more evident than on their self-titled debut, Ex-Military, where the inner workings of a troubled man are yelped over a cathartic cascade of clashing samples. Heavy, bulbous beats give the album a procedural binary sway that harkens images of a horror show funhouse in the listener's minds. It plunges up and down at will from the deepest tarnations to the highest jamboree, sending shockwaves through even the most accustomed fans' earholes. And the artwork, which is said to be a photograph that an undisclosed Death Grips member carried in their wallet for roughly 10 years straight, adds a sense of fear and foreboding to the experience before even playing the album. But there we have it, the disturbing music Iceberg. It was a long one, I know, but I hope you enjoyed it. I'd like to continue this iceberg and get into more and more disturbing things, but for that to happen I need to know that people are going to watch it. So if you would like to see more, please don't forget to like, subscribe and leave a comment. And I've been Modus. Peace.